8 things the Rings of Power does better than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies.
Wow.
So I thought it would be a good time if we go through each of these and just kind of lay into it a little bit. Thoughts, express how we disagree, because I'm assuming we will disagree with these.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because first of all, the pretentiousness to even consider writing
The
this
audacity.
Who wrote
the
this?
audacity.
Screen Rant. I don't know what the author is. The author's name
No,
here?
but it says right there. Well, I
Usually.
can't read it
By
though. It
Angel Shaw.
Okay.
Who is Angel Shaw? Oh, okay, a feminist.
I was gonna say if it's somebody who's like Mexican or of Latin descent, it would be Angel.
No, this is a white woke feminist pixie cut woman.
We did this.
She's
before
probably
last time
does she have her
when
her
Rings of Power
pronouns here?
came out? We went through an article and ripped the author to shreds. I don't know if you guys remember that. Do you remember? It was like some guy that wrote this article,
Yeah,
and we just like tore him up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to get into this. I want to see some of her points.
And we are gonna have stupid pop-ups the whole time, so I apologize. So let's get into the first one. First off, the premise of this is insulting. Let's see how insulting these points are that are being made. All right.
Okay.
First point, number 8. Rings of Power makes Sauron a more interesting character.
Wrong.
All right, so let's get into this. All right, my first initial thought
is the word of it gives him backstory, but a wrong backstory.
The wrong backstory.
Yeah.
They actually just made up a backstory for Sauron that's not correct.
And it's less interesting than the actual correct backstory from the Silmarillion and other writings about Sauron during this first and second age.
But you have to admit, I'll give him this. In Peter Jackson's movie, we have like no backstory. So there is no backstory in the movie.
We don't get anything.
Incorrect. The prologue in the Fellowship of the Ring about Sauron making the ring and crafting the one ring.
Right.
The story there.
Yeah. It gives you enough for a villain.
What kind of apologist are you?
Look, no, I get what Josh is saying, and
there is no backstory for Sauron in Peter Jackson's movie.
He's just the villain, and that's fine.
Yeah.
He is literally a dark force in the movies.
Yeah, and he's and in the books, he's got an awesome story, and I don't know why they went with this.
I think, look, if you were to say Sauron during the first and second age is more interesting because his character's more dynamic than in the third age, that can be argued. But the Rings of Power version is not better because it is not actually the story of Sauron.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
He goes,
but
have you ever thought of mixing the metals?
But you can't say this is more interesting because Lord of the Rings Sauron doesn't have a story or is more interesting than that. You can't say this is more interesting because they didn't give us enough in the Lord of the Rings.
No, I'm
movies,
not agreeing with this article. I'm just
you can't say that at all. There's no.
You're wanting to argue with me.
Lord of the Rings.
Hey,
because you brought up something stupid. With you. You said I want to.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm not arguing with you here.
You are. You're by the tone of your voice.
And I'm just saying. They wrote a character who asks a blacksmith and a metal worker if they've ever heard of metallurgy.
Metal.
Yeah.
You ever?
Hey, ever heard of a hammer?
You ever thought of? He asks the blacksmith. You ever thought of mixing the metals?
Yeah. What? We've been alive for thousands of
years. Dudes who
never thought of mixing metals.
Have been alive for 30 years and have never learned anything about metallurgy have thought, I wonder what would happen if I mix these two metals.
All right. I think that's a pretty good enough grab there. Okay, so Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings changed Elrond.
How is this
Elrond.
even a point? A pro? They
So-
changed Elrond. That's
All
not a
right.
pro.
I'll say
Wait,
this:
who-
when I didn't
I'm
look through
confused
all
by
of these,
this.
but when I first opened the article, I scrolled really quickly down and I landed on this one, and my brain instantly started to create a defense. And so,
I'm
in fact,
I'm
so
confused by this. Can you explain what do they mean by changed Elrond?
all right, so Elrond is among the more critical characters of the Lord of the Rings lore.
Okay.
And though Peter Jackson's film communicated this to a point, their version of the elves was nothing like Tolkien described. Okay, I'll get into that in just a second. This had much to do with Jackson's decision to make Arwen a stronger character with which was a great choice otherwise because feminism. To add more conflict to her relationship with Aragorn, Elrond was aggressive and distrustful as a result, lying and manipulating Arwen to keep her out of harm's way. The Rings of Power's version is more faithful to Tolkien's work, wise, kind, and enduringly good. Now, that's incorrect because if we look at one of the most extensive descriptions of what Elrond was, it was in The Hobbit.
Mhm.
All right. So if I look up, if I just do a quick Google search, it can give me a reference. Let's see. So, how is Elrond described in the Lord of the Rings books? This is a very easy Google search. All right. So let's see. So let me share this page right quick. This is just the top article when you search this, okay? So here we go. Where was it that it describes him? I think it was in the book. Okay. I actually probably should have kept my articles open personally, but
Yeah, maybe. Looking for
looking for it. Okay, look. Basically, this article, I don't know where it is because this is getting into the first and second age.
But
of
here
what
it
he did.
is. He was as noble and fair as an elf lord,
There it is.
as
Yes.
strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. He
Okay.
appeared neither young nor old, despite his seeming agelessness. That's who he was.
Well, that's how Elrond is in Peter Jackson. And you might say he appeared more aggressive, but that's not true because if you just look at any scene where he's not interacting in an aggressive manner, like when Frodo wakes up in Rivendell,
Yeah.
steps into the room, that warm summer smile that he gives him, and he says,
Yeah.
and he says, "You're stronger than you look, Master Frodo," or something like that. You know, freaking he has a presence of authority and wisdom,
Yeah.
but he
And-
also is very warm. It doesn't matter that he has an aggressive nature towards the relationship.
You have to take it into context. This is a man who is, close to leaving this realm and is uncertain about the future of Middle Earth, doesn't know exactly what's going to happen, and is scared to leave his daughter behind.
Yeah. And also, just to counter it with the Rings of Power a little bit, you want to talk about the Jackson trilogy changed Elrond. You changed Elrond simply by making his hair short and making him dirty blonde.
And lame. He's
and
not
lame
even
and
cool.
stupid. He sucks.
He's not even awesome.
He acts stupider than me. He's supposed to be thousands of years old and wise. He's a literal doofus in the Rings of Power.
Let's breeze through a couple more of these.
Yeah, because this is going to take forever for
dwarves aren't just comic relief in the Rings of Power. So basically, they're saying that in the Jackson trilogy, the dwarves are just the comic relief. Like Gimli is just a comic relief, and they're not respecting that they're like a noble.
Wait a minute. What about the very in-depth friendship love story of two brothers, basically between Legolas and Gimli, where like two people who hate each other ultimately become best friends, and then they don't show this in the movie, but then they become friends and go sailing together and live happily ever after.
What about the complex nature of the Hobbit movie Jackson did?
I watched The Hobbit not too long ago, like all 3 movies, and you can't tell me after watching Richard Armitage's performance of Oakenshield that dwarves aren't complex. That was his performance in those movies. No matter what you think of the movies in general, his performance, Balin's performance, even some of the other dwarves in the emotional beats that they have when they interact with each other and when they interact with Frodo, it's definitely more than
Bilbo.
Bilbo. You're right. It's definitely more than comic relief.
Yes, go back and watch.
There's a few characters like the fat dwarf.
Yeah, Bomber
is comic relief. And
absolutely,
that's fine because there's 12 dwarves.
But go back and watch Gimli through the whole section of the Mines of Moria, and tell me he's a comic relief at any point there. He is truly
grieving for his kin.
Grieving for his kin.
He's like, don't grab the beard. But, just the one scene.
Okay.
He's got a lot of
fleeing. But they're fleeing.
Yeah,
and that's more consistent with the character through the whole thing.
That's incorrect. I think all of these are just going to be so...
Okay, orcs look fantastic in the Rings of Power. And then this description basically says that practical effects are better than they were in Peter Jackson because just in general, they look better than Peter Jackson's trilogy, the practical effects.
Basically copied his looks, though.
For one, okay, let's be honest about this. Same artists, same people doing it.
Yeah, the orcs themselves didn't look bad, but they're
not worse than the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
no, they just copied Lord of the Rings.
No, and these orcs don't they don't do anything new. They don't change your perspective on the way orcs should look or the way they look in the movies. The practical effects in Lord of the Rings, I mean, just the Uruk-hai.
Yes.
Holy crap. Awesome.
I know. Yeah. It's truly mind-boggling how well the prosthetics and the practical effects of the movies are. I mean, just take a gander at this.
Yeah. The comparison with Harvey Weinstein.
Look, and this also is in Peter Jackson's. Look, these are great. There's nothing wrong with these.
If you look at The Hobbit as well, again, we're often really critical about the CGI nature of a lot of the movie, but there's a lot of practical orcs. There's a lot of them.
A lot more than you
a lot more than you think.
Yeah, you just overlook it because the white orc is animated.
He's completely CG, but comparing it to some of the CG I've seen recently, he looks incredible.
It's a lot better than some of the stuff coming out of Marvel or Star Wars,
Yeah. Next point.
Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings ruined Isildur. No, it didn't. It told an accurate prelude story summed up in about 4 minutes if you watch the extended version.
Yeah.
And it told the events of what happens accurately.
Yeah.
Unlike Rings of Power, which just freaking made up.
Here's my counter argument. Rings of Power ruins all of Numenor.
Yeah. All of Numenor, not just Isildur.
Yeah. They ruin all of Numenor.
There was a guy I worked with who was really excited about Rings of Power because they were getting into Numenor. He watched it, and he was like a big fan of the Numenor lore because he's a big fan of Lord of the Rings. He was so pissed about this.
Yeah.
So because pissed about the way they treated
the strongest armies, the strongest, like the greatest warriors to have ever lived, essentially, were the Numenorians.
Right.
And man.
They were the strong fist of the human race.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were the ones that created Minas Tirith. I mean, Minas Tirith was the Middle Earth descendants of the Numenorians, the greatest man kingdom in all of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And it's honestly that's a joke. All right. So number 3, Rings of Power gives elf characters more variety. Okay, so this is just we like that there's women that are in war. We like that there's black elves. We like
Here's
that
the
there's
thing.
old looking elves when honestly the elves should be all kind of roughly looking the
Yeah.
same age.
A lot of the whole point of elves in general is that they're all sort of similar. They're a different race, and so they're a different species essentially.
They're the first children of Iluvatar.
Yeah, so they're all sort of similar in the way that they look, in their age, in the way that they dress, in the way that they behave. There's some differences where some are more warlike and some are more reserved, and that's the point. That's what makes it interesting.
But the biggest difference is like the difference between kind of the descendants of the Sindarin elves with Legolas and his father,
Yeah.
and it contrasted with those in Lothlorien, you know, with Galadriel, where you have more of like the ancient angelic, more we avoid war type elves, and then those who kind of live a harder life or more willing to go to battle. But if you watch them, they're cut from the same cloth. They're not totally different from each other.
Definitely like some silk.
And if you read the Silmarillion, you know that the elves are very warlike. They're extremely warlike. Galadriel specifically is much more of a magic user, an enchantress. But the elves in general were Elrond and his father, and they were very much warriors.
Yeah. And I could be wrong a little bit, but I know 100% Galadriel was not a warrior.
Yeah, no, she wasn't.
I'm pretty sure when I say, because when Rings of Power was coming out right before, I was looking up the history, like the full history of Galadriel. I don't recall her ever being fighting in any battle. I don't think she saw battle personally. Like she wasn't amidst
she
battling.
cast spells and shieldings and wards and helped a great deal in different conflicts, but she
had a lot of loss. She had people that she loved. Other, I think her husband ended up dying, and she from war, but not because she was involved with war, because her husband was. Was it her husband? No, because he's still around. It might have been his father. It's been a while since I looked at her history, but she basically avoids. The reason she goes to Lothlorien is because she's avoiding war, and it's not because she's war torn from personal experience. She's literally she is against it. Like she doesn't want to be a part of war in the land.
I'm sure there's a point about Galadriel here.
Let's see. Yeah. Middle Earth is more diverse in Rings of Power. This is a non-talking point.
Yeah.
We already kind of went into
you can go and find any number of videos about this.
Look, it's not wrong to include. Obviously, it's not being mean or racist to say that diverse people aren't supposed to be in Middle Earth, because Tolkien was very clear that Middle Earth is supposed to be some ancient version of Europe, which did not include back in the day anybody else outside of white people. I mean, it just didn't include. So it's not racist to say that Tolkien's intention was that this is a very whitewashed people group.
It was European. I mean, all of history is, depending on where you go, that the way people look in those areas were the way people looked in those areas for centuries. And there wasn't much mixing and changing and mingling until very recently. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
not without it being a scandal.
Diversity. I mean, there is a lot of diversity in Peter Jackson's movie. I mean, the dwarfs, they're all Jewish, and so,
there's that.
The dwarves are Jewish?
No, not technically.
not technically, but
No, not
I know
technically.
the bankers in Harry Potter are Jewish.
Yeah,
Wait,
that's
Josh is out here saying dwarves are Jewish, but he doesn't know about the
No.
bankers in Harry Potter.
no. What's Gimli? What's the actor's name that plays Gimli?
Dang it, his name's escaping me. Not.
Is he Jewish?
I don't think so.
No,
Maybe he is. He played a Jewish guy in. I think he played a Jewish or Arab guy in Indiana Jones.
Well, the language that they speak is based on Hebrew. The one that Tolkien made up for the dwarves is based on Hebrew.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not Jewish, but
They're not. It's a joke, but there's a
Right.
lot of undertones.
What's number one?
All right. So
bother.
number one is Rings of Power covers more Middle Earth stories at once. So this is the whole thing about. Hold on, is that even true? First of all, and then second of all, this is the whole thing of them trying to be like Game of Thrones and cover a bunch of characters all at once.
Well,
Yeah,
and the characters are the same. The Harfoots are just a mimic of Sam and Frodo, the hobbits. It's literally the same thing. They're trying to tell it from a female, like two female Harfoots, rather than Frodo and Sam in the Lord of the Rings.
Well,
They're just telling that story.
How many storylines are we getting in Lord of the Rings? So by the time we get to Two Towers, the Fellowship is split up. We're covering Aragorn's personal story. We're covering Sam and Frodo and Gollum.
Yeah.
We're covering Merry and Pippin's story, which they actually separate for a bit. And Gandalf's kind of tied to them in some ways. And then we get into Faramir's story. So that's another storyline. And then we also have the Rohirrims.
Well, then eventually in the third, we split off even more. We get the story with Gandalf and Pippin in Gondor.
Right.
Then there's things going on in Rohan and Sam and Frodo, and so it's not a huge like jump between stories. There's only a couple, but you don't need that many. And the problem with switching between a bunch of characters is, especially if you're going to do it like they do, it's that mystery box aspect of every scene. There's like a little mystery box of what happens next, and we're gonna have to wait till we get back to these characters to see what happens next, so that we can get another mystery box, so that we can wait to see what happens next.
Now, Rings of Power covers, in my estimation, 3. So the Harfoots, Sauron and Galadriel, and Elrond and the dwarf. Am I missing any?
Yeah, there's the humans that are in Mordor,
but aren't they only introduced because Galadriel and Sauron show up?
No, they don't show up later.
No, the black elf.
Yeah,
whatever his name was.
Yeah,
so that's 4.
So it's them, it's him and the one lady. It's Galadriel, Elrond, and the Harfoots. That's it. It's only
4 stories. I think in Lord of the Rings, if we're talking about all the characters that are either pitted together or are on their own from Lord of the Rings, we might be talking about stories in Lord of the Rings, whereas this has 4 main ones. So I don't know what to tell you. This is just wrong. All of these points are just wrong. They're not even good opinions. They're just wrong. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Yes.
I knew I was coming to this conclusion, but also everything around the Rings of Power is just littered with lies. That from before the show came out, when they said we're taking everything from the book. If we have any concerns at all, we just go back to the book and we reference that and we make sure we stay true and we're respectful to the source material. It's just a lie. It's been
Yeah,
lies the whole time.
time.
And a year after it's released, we're still telling lies about it in Screen Rant articles, you know?
Yeah, well, they're trying to
Well,
drum up that sympathy from
They
I
didn't
mean,
even take
they're
into
trying-
consideration that this is not lore at all. This is nothing Tolkien wrote.
They're trying to get hype back up for season 2, but I think like Disney, Disney has been seeing, they're not going to get a lot of views on this. And if they're made to actually show us real numbers this time because of, the actors' strikes and deals that they've made, if they're going to actually have to put out some numbers to this show, it's going to be wild how many people don't watch this show. And I don't even think we should acknowledge it when it comes out because it is not worth talking
Here's
about.
the thing: the people who liked the show that I saw, it was very much a there's I kind of like it. There's portions of it that are good, and it also there's some of it's a bit long and tedious, and tell me those people are coming back. They're not.
Well,
they don't
They're
care.
not. They're not super fans that liked it. Those are not committed to the story.
No.
Those are fans that, or they're not even fans. Those are just people who are watching the show because it's a new show and don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, haven't read the books or anything. So they're just watching it for a show.
Yeah.
They watched Peter Jackson's trilogy once back in the early 2000s. You know what I'm saying? Those are the people that watched the show and kind of enjoyed it, but they're not fans. They're going to be hard pressed to sell those people on a season 2.
Yeah.
And if anybody watches it, remember they had to remove comments and ratings from Amazon Prime because they were so low.
And IMDb.
Let's not forget, season 1, out of the gate, episode 1, slammed. Honestly, the trailers came out and they were getting slammed.
Well, they had to. Yeah, no, on the trailer on YouTube, there was thousands and thousands of comments that was like that. Some people were spamming a comment that said like, something about evil, and I don't even remember do you remember what that phrase was?
I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know what you're talking about. And
it was a quote from the book that was like, good made out of evil is not good, or something like that.
Yeah.
And people were commenting that hundreds of thousands of times to where they had to turn off the comments so that they couldn't put
the issue with that was that that I feel like gave them an excuse to turn the comments off on Amazon Prime and on IMDb, because they're like, well, people are just going to troll, they're just jumping on a bandwagon and trying to troll. Yeah. But what about the legitimate?
Well, it was convenient because it allowed them to mute all of the legitimate critiques of this show. I truly don't know. Like, you can screw up Star Wars and add a bunch of stupid lore that's not interesting and dumb. It is not
George
as egregious.
Lucas did that.
Yeah, it's not as egregious. I don't think anything is as egregious. The only thing I'd be more upset about is if they decided to say, hey, Hollywood, we're going to make a Jesus show because The Chosen is so popular, and they do something crazy like they did with the Noah movie, where they just completely slander the Bible.
They've done Jesus shows, and they're terrible.
I guess, like the Magdalene movie.
Yeah. They've done Jesus movies and shows, and they're absolutely awful.
Look, ruining historical accuracies and people's personal faith about who Jesus was in Hollywood is here. Upsetting wise. Then you talk about what's going to be the next thing that's going to upset that stuff that Hollywood puts out, ruining respected bodies of work from Professor Tolkien. And I would kind of put in there, it won't be as big, but also C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, we're talking, Tolkien's a little above him in popularity, but C.S. Lewis is right there.
Yeah, as far as people that enjoy his works,
yeah,
absolutely.
So I mean,
Netflix got to be careful with their stuff.
Netflix has to tread lightly, especially if you're just jumping on any popular trend and hiring Greta Gerwig to make your Netflix Narnia film. I'm just saying there is nothing more upsetting than the Rings of Power in the past year, probably the past decade, probably the past century. When it comes to entertainment. All right?
I mean, I'm not disagreeing.
Because it's not just boring or dumb or a waste of time. It's slander.
Mm-hmm.